Okay, sorry about that again. Our consultant team was working with us to come up with the approach and evaluation of the projects that were submitted, which were solicited through a SurveyMonkey in March. So the projects, once we selected them from the community, were looked at to ensure that they provide at least two main benefits and that they address hazards, opportunities, or other resources affected by stormwater or dry weather runoff. And so the guidelines and our consultant team came up with these three main project types. So we have the regional capital improvement project, parcel scale low impact development, and green streets. They also came up with another kind of map set, and that is with the focus areas. So they identified promising localities that could be good opportunities for a stormwater resource or for a stormwater project to be implemented. So going back to our guidelines and how to prioritize projects, they gave the suggestion that projects should be prioritized according to these following elements. So things like having funding that's created, uses this metric-based approach, something that is located on lands in public ownership, that augments local water supplies, that preserves, restores, or creates watershed processes, or creates or restores habitat, open space, parks, recreation, or green space. So this is our diagram of the main steps leading to the prioritization of projects and programs through our plan. So you'll see kind of three steps here, and the first is screening, and so that's kind of what we just talked about, is ensuring that they hit these two main objectives and as many other additional benefits as possible. Then we go through a scoring, and so this is a spreadsheet that the consulting team has created in an Excel spreadsheet. And then this prioritization. So we won't go through all of this today, but this is all included in the draft. So I just kind of wanted to give a brief image of the diagram. So looking at our three project types, the regional capital improvement projects and parcel scale LID, going through that first step of screening, the screening requirements are that these areas are in public ownership, the slope is less than 10%. For regional projects, the acreage must be over a quarter, and for parcel scale projects, they are under a quarter. And the third kind of requirement is on undeveloped or only lightly developed land. So here's an example of one of the maps that shows all of the regional scale projects and parcel scale LID, and there's a whole map series of these in the plan. And then going forward to the green street, again, there's these are our screening criteria, so moderately trafficked streets, near adjacent commercial lands, and in locations that have less than a 10% hillside gradient. So these are potential areas. In the violet color is identified potential green streets. And so this was first done through a GIS exercise, and then we circulated it to our TAC to look at areas that they know definitely would never be a green street, or for ideas of locations that could be potential green streets in the future. So again, these maps exist throughout the county as potential green street locations. So all of the projects that have been submitted to date, it's about 30 projects, are identified on this countywide map here. And they're color-coded by the metric score. And so this metric score came out of the prioritization that you can read more about in the draft plan. So looking forward, what's next, as I mentioned in the beginning, we will be submitting our final plans to the State Water Resource Control Board. They will be reviewing the plan with the guidelines, and we have a checklist that we go through, a self-certification checklist. And it's basically a reference sheet to point out where we've met the water code requirements. So that will go to the water board, and they will review it and give concurrence. Once we receive concurrence from the water board, the plan will then go to the Integrated Regional Water Management Group, and they will adopt the plan into the IRWM plan. So for implementation and next steps, we've been working with Brendan at the county to make those next steps moving forward. I should also mention, the round 2 implementation is expected to come out late next summer is the latest we've gotten from our grant manager. And so that'll be something to keep your eyes on looking forward. So that's it. Sorry for all the technical difficulties, but thank you. And again, you can download the public draft on the county's website and then send comments either through a Google form, track changes, mail them, deliver them to my office, and then be sure to get all of those comments to me by October 10th at 5 p.m. So with that tumultuous presentation, I will hand it over to Devin.
Devin Best, Upper Salinas, Los Tablas, RCD. I'm also part of the project management team. I'm just going to go through the chapters. There's only 5, even though the actual plan is fairly thick. And this is just kind of an overview of what those chapters are, so that those that want to go through and read more thoroughly each individual section, you will get a sense of it. But you can see there's a lot of project partners that work on putting this together. City of Arroyo Grande, County of San Luis Obispo, and the 2 RCDs as well. Chapter 1 is the existing conditions that are in SLO County. Chapter 2 is the coordination and collaboration and plan development, types and locations of priority projects in Chapter 3. Larissa mentioned the screening and scoring prioritization, and then plan implementation. So I'll go through each one of these just kind of briefly, like I said, so you have a sense of kind of what's in them. And if you want to go back through and read them a little bit more thoroughly, they have a lot more detail of what's going on in each one of these chapters. So the first chapter, I think the primary thing we want to look at that is we had to try and figure out what is exactly in, how are we going to define our areas that we're working in? Are we going to do the entire county, or are we going to do individual watersheds? And there's 25 watersheds in SLO County. If we try to do a kind of a stormwater plan for all 25 watersheds, it may be a little bit too much. So we tried to try and group things together a little bit. So we came up with this plan to have 9 watershed groups, and this would be representative based on the types of topography, hydrology, community involvement, water supply, land cover, and land use. The way that it's broken out is we have 9 of them. It's Cambria, Morro Bay, San Luis Obispo, Arroyo Grande, Pismo, Napomo, Wasna Valley, and then the Estrella, San Luis and Estrella are 2, and then the Carrizo Plain as well. And the main thing they're kind of look through this in chapter is basically this is trying to get an assessment of the in total land use and the watershed conditions. So we're looking at the condition of the watersheds, historical and current, looking at what stressors are causing any sort of impairment, and then looking at what the biological endpoint that we're trying to achieve through stormwater management projects. Chapter 2 gets more into the plan development, which Larissa kind of went through in detail. It talks about how we try to get stakeholders involved, public engagement, identify strategies to the greatest of support, outlines the process and steps to carry out the plan. I had to point out here, I'm going to make sure I got the laser. Here we are today, September 20th. I kept remembering why that was an important day. I also forgot that it was my sister's birthday, so I early this morning remembered to make sure I wished her happy birthday and told her I'm off to go give her a presentation. But you can see we started back in February. We spent many months going through, working with outreach, working with the consultant team, working with stakeholders, identifying who those people were. And this is pretty much in Chapter 2, goes through and identifies how we figured out who was a stakeholder, who we should be contacting, how to develop a TAC, a technical advisory committee, how the project management team works together, et cetera, et cetera. Chapter 3 gets more into the types and locations of priority projects. So we had to kind of look through and figure out, well, we've got this large area we're trying to cover, and we're trying to figure out what are the primary issues that we're looking at. And this starts working on some of those things that Larissa was talking about the regional and parcel scale and Green Street projects. Where are they going to have the greatest benefit? Where are the priority areas we need to be working in? And then I think the main point about this is in our particular stormwater resource plan, in comparison to most others, they're mostly focused on, even though they talk about the whole watershed or the whole area, they're primarily focused mostly on the urban areas. With San Luis Obispo County, we have small urban areas, and most of it's more open space elements, and a lot of it's in agriculture. So our kind of difference, I guess you could say, or nuance to it, is that we try and curate more of a watershed approach, look at the entire watershed, both open space, agriculture, public lands, as well as the urban and residential areas. Chapter 4, the screening, scoring, and prioritization of the projects. It's a multi-step process, 3-step process. Larissa talked about it pretty well. But I think the main thing in this is this was really kind of a challenge for the project management team and the consultant team to try and take all this information about the watershed condition and trying to figure out how do you walk through metrics based on the stormwater resource guidelines to come up with a prioritization of projects. So if we had, say, 100 projects that we had a list of, how do you go through and score those based on the different inputs that people have? And here's, again, the slide that we have on this process. I think it's pretty fascinating to go through and walk through each one of these. We've gone through a few of them, just going and implementing projects and see how they work themselves through. But it does take into account proposed projects, which are sort of individual projects in a certain area, proposed programs, which would be something that might be carried out through the entire county, and then focus areas where we really need to focus our efforts to make sure we're getting the best stormwater resource control practices. It does come on a quantification, so we do try and quantify the stormwater measures that are going to come out of that, so we have a sense of that. But there's also some of these other things that kind of help with the prioritization, which is more about the cost, the operation and maintenance agreements if they're in place, the readiness to proceed, public input or prioritization. So there's a lot of other factors that kind of play into. So even if you may have a project that has good, quantification of benefits, it may have a readiness to proceed and a low cost. So we're trying to balance those sort of variables into it so that we can kind of rank things through in each watershed area. And then chapter 5 is where we're kind of at today. This is plan implementation. So this is kind of where we go from the next steps. Now that we have a plan pretty much done, what do we do with it? Do we just put it on the shelf and say, great, checkbox, we did our good job? Or do we have something that's going to be more of a living document? And obviously, as we put here, it is a living document. We are looking at how we can try and keep assessing and evaluating the plan itself, how relevant it is, but then also to track and monitor the individual projects over time. So we want to make sure that not only do we do the plan itself, but as we do projects, are they meeting the goals of stormwater management and water quality and improvements? So that's it. I'm pretty quick, I realize.
Any questions, comments so far? All right. Well, we'll take a short break, and then we'll get our project ready to go on the computer somehow. So we'll come back in about 10 minutes. We've got Darla Elsvik on the line, and she's going to be our first project presenter. So I have her slides here, and I will slide through, and hopefully we can hear her all right.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Sorry I can't be there. I'm presenting this project on behalf of the City of Morro Bay. Damaris Hansen couldn't be with you today. This is one project in the Stormwater Resources Plan that was developed as part of the Low Impact Development Initiative program last year. A suite of projects in the Central Coast, all low impact developed within the municipal city boundaries for several cities. Morro Bay had 3 projects that went through concept design, and this boat wash project is one of them. And several of those projects are on the project list. So to begin, just to orient you to the project location, here on the slide you see the City of Morro Bay, lovely Morro Bay rock there in the upper left-hand corner. And the Embarcadero hugs the water line there along the city. And at the southern end of the Embarcadero is Tidelands Park. And that is the location of this project. Tidelands Park is a very small park. The boat launch area, it has a small grass area for play, a couple of park benches for looking out at the water, and it is a City of Morro Bay park. This project is a municipal stormwater project, meaning it's within the city boundaries, city municipal boundaries, and it addresses stormwater runoff that's discharging to the bay, into the ocean. And it's just one of a handful of projects in the plan that discharge to the ocean. Most of the projects just inherently in the watershed and on the list discharge to creeks and streams. And so there's only a handful of projects on the list and in the project plan that actually discharge to an estuary bay ocean, and this is one of them. The project is using low-impact development techniques, which I will discuss a bit in a minute. And I mention that because low-impact development inherently provides several multi-benefit social, economic, environmental, and mimics natural watershed processes. So next slide, please. Are we there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is just zooming in a little bit just to further orient you geographically. So the blue dot is the project area at Tidelands Park along the Embarcadero. And the upper left picture shows the actual project site, which is an underutilized portion of a very large parking lot that the city has. This project is going to remove impervious surface and create a low-impact development biofiltration type project, which I will discuss as we go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So let's look at what the current condition is. There's a lot on this slide, and I'll further orient you. So the project area that I just showed you, that underutilized parking lot there in that top image, is the blue oval circle. The word inlet is above it, and that's that area of the parking lot. The red outlined area is the drainage management area, or all the area that's contributing stormwater runoff to an inlet that's located right at this project site. And the lower left-hand corner shows that inlet. So water runoff, stormwater runoff, and it's primarily street and commercial development. So we've got a lot of pollutants from vehicles, oils, greases, metals, etc., runs off these impervious surfaces and goes through a valley gutter, which is that concrete area by that inlet. So it routes that water into that inlet. And if you look at the lower right-hand picture, what happens is all that runoff goes untreated into that inlet. It crosses the street in a pipe, and it discharges directly untreated to the bay. So you can see, I hope you can see that the inlet, it's a black corrugated pipe that's there. So in that upper picture, it's depicted by that purple line. Runoff goes into that inlet and out. And there are a lot of situations like this, either going to creeks or oceans throughout the county. The reason this particular project was of interest to the city is that in the right-hand portion of the drainage management area, there's a yellow oval, and that is depicting their boat wash area, which is why we're calling this the boat wash project. And people can take their boats out of the water, and they rinse off at this location. And that water goes into that inlet. It's considered a dry weather flow, so it's not permissible via the Stormwater National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. And the city at one time had a violation for allowing non-stormwater into an inlet. So the impetus for this project was to be addressing that boat wash runoff, but because we have the opportunity, we can also look at the runoff from this whole contributing drainage area. And I don't know, Larissa, if you're pausing for questions as we go through. Are we good? Or questions?
I think we're good, Darla.
Okay, next slide. The future condition that we're looking at is to take that area near that inlet, that underutilized parking lot, remove that impervious surface, and then as the stormwater is coming along in that blue line picture there on the left, the blue arrow, what we would do is we would route the stormwater into that project area before it can go into the inlet, and we would use something like the picture on the right. And this is just a conceptual depiction of a bioretention or biofiltration type design where the stormwater would be captured and filtered. It wouldn't have full infiltration, but it would infiltrate into a pipe and then go treated out through the discharge point. And so that is essentially what the project area might look like. And the next slide, okay. Just a couple summary items. So this looks at about 2.5 acres of impervious area, and it's mixed land use. And in the context of the stormwater resources plan, this is maybe moderate scale. It's definitely not a huge regional project. We do see LID projects that might address just a small parking lot area, but 2.5 acres might be something that's considered moderate on the municipal scale. In the plan, this project got points because in the scaling, because we were able to actually quantify the treatment benefit and performance, which will be the 85th percentile 24-hour storm event, which is considered the water quality design event, and points because dry weather flows are a priority to address from that boat wash. Some of the qualitative benefits include the urban greening, so the vegetation and native vegetation that would be created, the creation of an additional recreation space. This would be managed by the Parks Department. And it also is a secured project site, meaning the city does not have to get any easements or purchase property. It's already owned by them. And that's a very positive thing in the sense that for ongoing maintenance of the site, the city will own the site. They'll be able to be accountable for long-term performance of that site. And then, of course, regulatory compliance is a benefit from both the dry weather flow violation as well as just progress on the city's stormwater program. And then lastly, things like reducing the heat island effect that's caused by our existing impervious surfaces throughout our urban areas. And last slide is next. So I'd like to point out again that this is a filtering project. It's a water quality treatment project. So infiltration is not really the primary objective, and I point this out because most of the projects on the project list are infiltrative for benefits such as reducing volumes and rates of stormwater runoff that cause erosivity to creeks or flooding, water supply augmentation, capture and reuse of stormwater, and this project is not that category of project. We're really trying to treat the water. There's no water supply issue at this location. There's no reason to really be managing volumes. There's no erosivity issues at this point. So it's really a water quality project only, and that makes it somewhat different from a lot of different, a lot of projects in the plan. And the project cost ranges, it's quite a range. It's $35,000 to $240,000, depending on how much of that contributing area and how much of the volume of water the city would like to treat. It changes the footprint of that particular project. Lastly, the project is actually a finalist for a National Recreation and Parks Great Urban Parks Grant, and we're going to find out tomorrow whether we get it. We're very high on the list, so that's very exciting for the city. And I also point this out because this project, going through conceptual design, identifying projects, having them on a list overall is really important. This grant opportunity came along. It was a very quick timeline to turn it around. If the city had not already identified this project, they probably wouldn't have been able to get it into this proposal process and potentially get funding for the project. So it's a really good thing to have gone through this planning process, get this project within the overall plan, and have it ready immediately to be funded with any opportunity that comes along. And lastly, Damaris Hanson, again, she's the City of Morro Bay person who's the contact for this project, and her email address is there on the slide. And that is hopefully stayed within my time limit. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Darla.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
The reason we identified this project is for the Stormwater Resource Plan, and this is how it fits within that watershed process I was mentioning before, is this is actually working on a much larger scale that involves the landowners that are upstream of the city. So it's not an urban development project or a LID project, but it's more of sort of a watershed process. And what we're doing is we're actually identifying places where we can do groundwater recharge by capturing high flows during the stormwater periods. What has happened in Santa Rosa Creek watershed in particular, a lot of the unnamed tributaries to Santa Rosa Creek have been channelized and moved over for agricultural production. And so we have a number of willing landowners that are looking at those areas to actually build some infiltration galleries, some wetland recharge potential projects. And so the end goal of that is that there's multi-benefits. The three main benefits, I'm sorry, are water supply, environment, and flood management. And there's a fourth one, which is water quality, but it's not quite as loosely or as not quite as tied to as for the project itself. But the idea here is that this would sort of build upon being able to manage flood management in Santa Rosa Creek. And we already have designs that are going forward. We got funding through Wildlife Conservation Board. We're actually in the beginning process of identifying what those designs will look like. And then the next step will be actually implementation. So as we went through and scored this project, it ranked fairly high for that particular watershed group. And then I think the idea is that this would be sort of phase one pilot projects, and that there would be multiple opportunities to work with other landowners further up stream. And where we're working at is actually in the middle reach of Santa Rosa Creek. So we had looked at that because it has a high infiltration potential there. Other than that, I think that's pretty much all I really had to say. Any questions anybody has? I've presented on this project before, so okay.
Actually, a month and a half ago. Yes, Cano, C-A-N-O. So One Cool Earth, we really see ourselves as paraeducators throughout the county. We're in 17, 18 schools, elementary schools, and a couple of junior high schools in the county. And what we have as a nonprofit is unique access to the school system, basically. We work with over 500 students and teachers every month. And a lot of our curriculum is organically developed to bring garden learning into the classroom. And so we connect it with STEM learning and make sure that we're not only creating sort of an outdoor lab, but we're incorporating things like drainage. We do recycling programs. We do a recycle audit for the schools, which kind of is part of this program. We ask the school to not throw away their trash for a whole day, and we have the students pick through every single trash item that's thrown out that day. They separate it, they weigh it, and then we end up having at the end of the day an assembly to talk about the lessons with that. You know, where does it go? Does it end up in the stormwater? Does it end up in the drains? What do we do with it? What can be kept to compost? So I think One Cool Earth's interest in this project is really complementing what we're doing already, but also enhancing access to the schools, access to the program information and research that comes out of this, but also embedding it into our curriculum, which I think complements nicely with starting to grow our community from K through 5 and then the upper grades. So any questions?
And then lastly, we'll have Mladen come up and talk about the Toad Creek project.
Do we have slides for that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So I just want to make a comment with Dan. You guys got a DROPS grant a few years back from the state, which was great. I remember helping kind of with that initially, but I think the educational component that Dan is working on and One Cool Earth and the other agencies complement and provide that community benefit to the implementation projects that we do, which is I think that's the entire point of this, is that how do we get multiple benefits? Well, we may need multiple stakeholders. We need those in the educational field or community benefit field, those that provide the opportunities and work opportunities, those that provide the parks and rec, and add that into the supply, the watershed enhancement elements. So integrating all of those stakeholders and agencies and organizations. All right, so real quick, thank you. This is the Toad Creek project. This was a late submittal. This was part of the county's drainage study plan that we looked at, and it wasn't until a stakeholder who had been working on it from a while back had come up and just said, we need to include this. And I want to stress before jumping into this is that if there are new projects and that projects that aren't on the list, or concepts or ideas, the plan is intended to be a living plan, and so we're going to keep adding projects as we go to this. And the Regional Water Management Group is the agency or the entity, the group to be looking at that. So as new ideas come up, as integration with other projects happen, we want to keep moving towards looking at new projects. So this isn't a final list. This is just the start. So Toad Creek project was thought of a while ago. It was project 8 of the Templeton drainage study that was done. There was a number of drainage studies done in 2003, 2004 for the county areas, for the unincorporated areas where we looked at drainage issues and flooding issues. And for the Templeton area, that came a little bit later in the process. And there was a number of projects that were looked at for Templeton. And then a last project was added, project 8, looking at specifically infiltration and recharge on the north side of the downtown area on is it Templeton Road? Main Street. Thank you. Right on either side of Main Street on the north side, there are 2 basins or 2 areas that have not been developed yet, and that they are in alignment with Toad Creek. And so those would be, and they're near to Salinas River as it flows north, and they would hold back and capture water before it goes into the Salinas, and the Atascadero sub-basin, or Atascadero Basin now, is directly underneath that. And so the focus will be for a 5 or 10-year storm capture. So here's a picture of the 2 basins. That's Main Street going north. When you look at the FEMA maps, the flood maps, right, if you drew a line between those 2 basins, the 100-year floodplain would cross right over Main Street, and so it would, during heavy storms, it might create an access issue for services. And so having those basins, at least the 8A basin, as the Toad Creek flows to the northeast there, it would help prevent and lower the amount of flood that goes over Main Street. Total project for both those, about $7 million. That was an old estimate, but it would help and aid mainly in the infiltration of stormwater into the groundwater basin. Let's see, yeah, multiple benefits. So flood management, lessening the 100-year or the flood, that water supply benefit and water quality benefit as it treats it before it goes into the Salinas. And so it was included into the Stormwater Resource Plan. We got it in there as a concept. Well, the next step is that as staff, the county is going to meet with the Templeton Area Advisory Group, which is the local advisory council in that area, and start to work with them, get a concurrence on the recommendation, and then we're going to take the Templeton drainage studies back to the Board of Supervisors for a final approval, and then we'll have a study for that area. And then we'll submit, that project onto the list for the capital improvements. Yeah, that was it. Any questions on that?
So, as I said earlier, I'm John Goodrich. I live at 3515 Curry Road. But I bought the ranch 10 or 15 years ago, and I got a call from one of the ranchers that winter saying that the southern fence was 4 feet underwater. I grew up in California. I haven't seen 8 foot deep water in my lifetime, in a place that I didn't expect it. That was Warden Lake. I'm not sure all of you know where Warden Lake is. Warden Lake sits above the town of Los Osos. And it sits below a 5,300 acre watershed. An average year, that's 7,500 acre feet of water. The comment, which is in your plan, respecting the town of Los Osos, is that the only way it can balance its resources versus the water consumed is by the Los Osos residents restricting their consumption. Today, their consumption is restricted to about 880 acre feet a year. That's how much water they have. Even with that amount, seawater intrusion, which is the problem in the basin, is continuing. So at some point, even the 880 acre feet won't be available. Yet passing through Warden Lake, which is just to the north of the aquifer, is 7,400 acre feet a year of stormwater. Warden Lake, when the Spaniards were here, was a lake. It wasn't a marsh. Today it's a marsh. It's a very small marsh. But with wild guessing at engineering, with a berm that was 7 or 8 feet high, we could sequester about 100 acre-feet in what was the old Warden Lake. Fortunately, they built a sewage plant to take care of the effluent from Los Osos. It's less than 100 yards from Warden Lake, and it has a water reinjection capacity because that's what it was intended to do. Take the effluent, treat it, and put it back in the aquifer. That 100 yards, or less than 100 yards, is not an expense in terms of pipe. That's a cheap exercise, and so is a berm across the west end of Warden Lake. If we even captured 10% of that stormwater runoff with any reasonable effort, we could more than double the water available to the town, which means that the severe water restrictions would go away, for 16,000 people. Same time, seawater would be under much greater pressure from the east, be pushed back out to sea, which is what everybody hopes will happen. Leaving a pipe at the bottom always open means that what we would provide about 3.5 million gallons a day of water for the fishery, which today doesn't have any regular water. It either floods or is dry. That would also protect the downstream Cherry Road waterway, which erodes each year when there are heavy rains. That erosion goes into Morro Bay and silts it up. The sequestration pond behind the berm would also drop a lot of silt out of the stuff that comes out of the upper watershed. That too would protect Morro Bay. So if I have to list the benefits, I get fish, strongly benefited. Morro Bay, benefited by lowering the amount of siltation. The community of Los Osos, freed of water restrictions, and you can take your own number, but let's say that's worth $500 million in property value. And the quality of life for the 16,000 people goes up sharply. Those are the real benefits of this, and I would bet that reasonably estimated, at least in the private sector, somebody could spend less than $300,000 and do the entire project. The project floods private lands. There are 3 ranches that have the land in the bottom. All 3 of us are happy to have the land flooded. Well, at least 2 of us are, and I think the third one would. So that's my proposal for the project. It obviously requires a lot of study. But if you really look at its benefits in capturing stormwater and using it reasonably, I don't think there's anything else which matches it. Not for cost and not for the extent of benefits. There is a paragraph in the document that does need to be changed. It is not true that there's not water available to take care of the problems in Los Osos. That's it. Thank you.
Any other comments, items for discussion, follow up to that?